Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar. My name is Melissa Steiner, and I'm the moderator today. We'll begin in just a few minutes. This webinar will be recorded, and we will send you the link to the video, so feel free to relax and enjoy the presentation. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, you can type them into the questions box in the GoToWebinar panel. Q&A will be at the end of the session, and if we do not respond to your question, we will get in touch with you by email. Now I will hand it over to Holly Kramer, and she will get us started.
Hello, everybody. I wanted to thank you for joining us today. Today we're going to be talking about how the different methods that you can use to keep track of staffing inside of Affinity. This is a fairly advanced topic, so I just want to, I'm going to try to keep this high level. But I do apologize if some of this gets a little bit technical. But like Melissa mentioned, we are going to have time at the end for Q&A. So please feel free to ask any of those kind of questions if I've said something that might be a little bit over the level that you're used to using Affinity at. So with that, I'll go ahead and begin. So just to sort of talk to you a little bit about how we do the staffing, the basic steps of it. If any of the Affinity users are familiar with the concept of our library, which is basically the template, which you can see of the template inside of the software. So in the library, you find things just like the typical space type, your objects, so furniture and equipment. It's where you store all of the standards for your project file. So one of the tabs that we have in the library is what we call resources. And resources are actually the people, they're the staff. So what you do is you would actually create, as I've done here, a series of role-specific staff. So you've got admin, administrator, artistic staff. And what this allows you to do is just like with a space type, where you might have an office that you specify to be 10 by 12 with particular furnishings in it. With an artistic, or let me just use this consultant here, with a resource, you can actually go in and specify some certain things about that particular resource. Most importantly being the default space type. So for every consultant, I can say that I want it to be a workstation standard. So this is where you're going to start to establish what space allocation is going to be given over to that particular role. There's various other properties you can fill in. The other one that we tend to fill in is this role, in case you need to be a little bit more descriptive about what that particular role is or does. So let me just go ahead and add one really quickly. I'm going to go ahead and add one called executive. And I'm going to base it off of a person and say, okay, there's my executive. And I want to give him a office space type. And executive is pretty specific as far as the role goes, so I'm actually not going to fill that in. So you would go in and you would build up your template with the types of roles that your client or you feel is necessary to keep track of inside of your program. So now that's sort of the basics. That's what a resource is. That's how you create them. So now let's talk about how you actually use them inside of your program. And there's several different methods. The first one I have as an example here in this sales and marketing program department. The first one would be if you need to be able to keep track of staffing numbers, how many admins you have or how many directors you have, but you don't actually want it to affect the square footage of your program. This is strictly just to keep up with a staff count. The benefit of doing this as a subdepartment that we have here is maybe, the client needs it to be reportable. Maybe they want to see it broken up of what staff is assigned to this particular department. But because they're a person, they don't really want it to add square footage to the program. So in order to create this, rather than, like we would do down here with the boardroom where it is an actual space, you can actually use these resource space types that we just created to create program items. And so let me just demonstrate that real quickly. I will go and add an executive that we just did. So from this pull down here, normally what you would see it defaulted to is this rooms category. But in this list, you can actually pick from resources. And I can come here and say I want to add an executive role. And then I can go in and say how many of those I'm going to have in the current phase and then in the projected phase. And say OK. And so you'll see the space type that it defaults to and its quantities, and everything down here tallies up as well. Another way to do the similar concept, but let's say that you actually do want it to account for square footage. So in this particular case, we've got a subdepartment for staff, and we've got the shared department with the physical spaces in it. And this one is going to be made up of program items that will be actually based off of space types. But the difference here is that instead of it being called office, it's going to be called for the role that it's representing. So you've got admin staff, admin support, so on and so forth. And the benefit of doing this is that it will actually recognize the square footage. So if I want to come here and say, that I've got 2 of these in the existing phase, you'll notice that this quantity over here changes. So this is directly affecting the square footage inside of your program. So thereby, the physical workstation or office that person is going to accumulate is being tracked both with the role and the square footage. In the event that you had, I'll talk a little bit more about how you account for shared workspaces at the end, but in the event that you actually wanted to do that here, I can actually create properties in my program that will actually allow me to keep track of staff. So, for example, for this admin staff, let's say that they currently share a workstation. So for the existing, rather than saying that there's 1, there's really 2 people there. Okay, well, okay. So moving on. The third method would be, I've seen a lot of clients do this if the name of the person is very specific to the client. A lot of times a client will hand over an org chart and they want to be able to see that every single person is accounted for in the floor plan design. The way that you would do that in Affinity is you can create program items. And just like we did with the generic space types, instead of this being a generic admin or administrative staff, it would actually be a person's name. And then this would be a quantity of 1, because there will always only ever be 1 of Janine Beaumont. So it starts to become a lengthy program, but the benefit of this is when you do drag this out into design later, Janine Beaumont is very clearly represented on the floor plan. And it's very easy for you to be able to tell if you've accidentally counted her twice in the design. And then you can also combine that with, I've got a to be hired here. So this will actually allow you to just, lump in future hires, and this can just be the actual quantity. And then let me show you. Let's say that you don't want to, you want to just do a regular program. You don't want to have staff, staff subdepartments or anything like that, but you do need to keep track of resources. The way that you can do that is, so here is, you're seeing still the view of my resource types that I've established into my template. I can go here under this Program tab and actually create named project-specific resources. So I've got here Rosalie Quinto, and if I double-click on her, I can see that Rosalie Quinto is assigned to have the admin support space type. She was based off of the administrator resource type, and I can even specify which group she's supposed to belong to, sales and marketing staff. So the benefit of having this set up as named people, when I go into my floor plan, if I actually want to then drag those people out and assign them to the room, much the way that you would assign a piece of furniture, I can do this directly in design. So let me show you this director here. When I click on director and go to this resources tab, it's actually currently empty. I don't have anybody assigned into that resource tab. If I want to, I can drag out this Anders McLean is set up to be the director. So I'm going to drag him out and place him into that particular office. So now he is now assigned. And you could run a report that would then show you who all is specifically assigned, who has been laid out in the design, who has been accounted for. Another useful thing that we have is if you're having to analyze floor plans and start to look at, move management. How are you going to rearrange these people on the floor? We actually have added in what we call the swap feature. So if you'll notice, I've got this directors here that has a particular layout configuration to its furniture. Let's say that he needs to actually switch to this office here. I don't want to just, I don't want to drag them out and rearrange my floor plan. That's going to take too long. What I can do is actually swap them. If I select them both, the one I highlighted first being the primary, I can right-click and say Swap Items. And what it does is it physically exchanges the two. These two spaces happen to be the exact same size, but had these not been the same size, you would see that it would conform it to the new shape. The furniture that was assigned into Director moved with it, and Anders is still assigned to be in this space. So you could go through your program here and rearrange your floor plans, thereby moving the people and the furniture accordingly through that swap feature. And the last thing that I kind of wanted to cover, which is a little bit more lengthy of a description, would be how to account for a workforce that is mobile. So you've got people that are, they work off-site, and they come in and they need a spot, when they physically come into the office, but they're not there 5 days a week. So depending on how complicated you want to do this, I'm going to show you the less complicated method. So let me switch to my other project file. Okay. So in this, what I've done is I'm using our Conceptual program, which might actually also be something else that some of you may not be familiar with. We have a Conceptual program feature, which will allow you to keep track of and test out different program scenarios without having to have that be in your final program. When you are done sort of gathering this information and testing out different types of program configurations, you can actually push the pieces that you want into the regular space program. For this particular case, what I would like to do is use this conceptual as the way that I keep track of my staffing. So as opposed to doing a sub-department within a main department, I just want to keep track of how many admin I have for the whole program, how many executives and managers and staff. These happen to be the space types that I created. And just like with the other file, when I created these resource types, I went ahead and assigned a particular space type to them. This is really important because what I'm going to show you is actually going to be how do you translate your staffing projections to a program. So how do you take the number of employees that you've specified with the workspaces that they've specified needing into an actual space program. So in this case, you would want to be sure to assign the space type that role receives. And then you would just come in here and fill out how many people you have in those particular roles. When you're done doing that, you can actually go to, I have a space program here that is empty, and I can begin to actually add my program item. So here I'm going to add an item, and I'm going to make it a small workstation, and I'm going to call it an intern. This particular intern staff, they don't work full-time, so we're going to have it to where they actually share a workstation with another intern. So with most items that you create in a program, you typically will have them as a quantity or a total area. This is how most of our clients will set up a program item. But we do have something called a conditional quantity and a conditional area. I'm going to set this up as a conditional quantity. And what that means is that when you set this up, you have the number of this particular item is dependent on the number of something else that you specify. So in this instance, I'm going to say that I have one intern in a small workstation. For every two, I'm going to come here and say, and instead of it being rooms, it's going to be resources. And I'm going to say for every two staff members that I've specified. And then you're going to tell it where to look for those numbers. So I'm going to say conceptual and go to staffing. So what this is basically saying is for every one, for every two staff members that you specified in your conceptual program, which is where you're tracking your staffing numbers, it's going to provide me one intern small workstation. So just by doing that, I automatically have 12 of them. So I'm going to flip back to the conceptual, and you'll see that there are 24. So 2 of them sharing would mean 12. What I like about this method is it's very easy for you if your staffing numbers change. If they, give you numbers at the beginning of the program, but then towards the end of the programming phase, they give you new numbers. You can very easily come in here and say, okay, instead of 24, we really only have 20. Come here and refresh, and it automatically generates those 10 for you. So you don't have to go through and manually find all the ones that were related to the staff number and come back and change them yourself. Because you've set this up to be a conditional quantity, it will automatically generate those spaces for you. It's very easy to control your staffing numbers here and use that conditional quantity to generate your program items for you. Now, this is a simple example. This is a 1-to-1 or a 1-to-2 type of ratio. If you had a more complicated situation where, let's say that you had different levels of work sharing, you had some people that were in and out of the office 10% of the time, some are in and out 40%. You could even go as far as to say some departments are, have a certain percentage of really mobile people versus non. When you start to kind of figure out all that math, it gets a little complicated. You can actually set up properties here in our software, just like I showed you that staffing number on the previous file. You can actually come in here and set up percentages and allow the reports to run all those calculations for you. You could even have scripts that, again, you would just type in the numbers. You would specify the percentages of, which department is more active and versus not. Run those scripts and update it. So rather than you have to go and recalculate it yourself, you could allow the script and the program to do all the math for you. So that's kind of the overview. I see that there are some questions, so I think, Melissa, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and just start asking the questions, and then we'll see what people want to know.
All right. Let's see. The first question that I have is, can you populate resources from an outside file or XML refresh?
Yes, I believe you can. We have a script, we have an Excel import that's called populate template, and what that allows you to do is populate your space types and any other types of template information through an Excel file. So you could put resource information into that and bring that in and build that up. Like I have it here. Let me show you here. I've got a stack where we've got that role, or I've got that space type assigned. You would want to make sure that anything that you're assigning to those resources is also, that the space type is set up in the template as well. Because then otherwise all you'd be doing is creating a staff person that doesn't have a space type associated to it. But yes, you can bring that in through an Excel import.
Okay, and next question that I have here is, actually I have a couple of questions about conceptual design. So could you just discuss some of the functionality in conceptual design beyond staffing?
Sure. Conceptual design doesn't have to be done just for the staffing. The idea behind it is, let's say that your client is trying to figure out, how many departments. Let's say that they're looking at a couple of different buildings, and they're trying to figure out how much space they have, and they're trying to figure out, how much room they have to expand in the future. And they want to play around with a lot of numbers, but you don't want to have to finalize a program and then have them change some things and go back and have to edit your program. So the conceptual program will actually allow you to, play around with a lot of different scenarios. And the totals and things that you would see here don't really matter because they aren't your final program. They're not what you're going to create your design from. They're not what your design is being validated against later. So this allows you to create departments, phases, quantities, whatever you need to sort of experiment with until you kind of hone down what the actual program is going to be. And then when you come into the program, you can actually just add in those departments from the conceptual that actually are the ones you want to keep with and move forward with.
Okay, great. And I have another question here about, can you apply resources to an existing layout?
Yes. Let me go back to my other file. So if this answers the question, so I mean, it would be just like I did it here. You have an existing, floor plan that you have. You don't have to have them assigned in the program by any means. If you wanted to, you could just create the roles that I have here, and then from the roles, you could choose to or not to create the named individuals, and then you can drag them out. So in this case, I drug out Anders into, well, it was this office here. I can actually drag out, you know, just a generic position into a space. So I can say, okay, I'm going to have a marketing person in the library. Yes, it could be an existing floor plan. You know, you'll use your program items to create the design, or because we sync with Revit and SketchUp, you could actually bring in a design from another software, and then you could start to assign those resources or individualized people into that floor plan. I hope that answers that question.
Okay, great. And I have another question that says, can we create our own script, or do you have to create it for us?
No, most of the time we end up having to create the script. It's usually a fairly simple process. We have, you know, it kind of depends on what's being done. We would have to talk with you about specifically how your program is set up and what it is that you're wanting to accomplish. But generally, scripts are very simple, and we can get those out pretty quickly. And we may or may not charge for it, depending on you know, the complexity of it, that sort of thing.
Okay, and the other question is, can the conceptual piece or conceptual program be used across multiple floor plans and models?
Can the conceptual piece be, I'm sorry, say that again, Melissa?
Can the conceptual piece be used across multiple floor plans or models?
Yes, we have. We actually have something called, very similar to Revit's design options. We have scenarios. So if you had different, you know, design layouts for your floor plans that you need to do, or if you just needed to, you know, if you had different levels in your building, you could actually, in Affinity, let me get to the design tab here. You know, so this particular one is one building that is 6 stories. I could actually have a second building. Let me add this. I could actually have a second building that I want to. And those resources can be assigned anywhere. It can be assigned onto any floor. They can be assigned into any building. And likewise, any scenario that you might have in your design, you can put those in. You can put those in wherever you would like to put those in. And with the scenarios, you would, let me just show you this real quickly. So if I want this office to be in a multiple scenario, I can specify over here in the details pane the different scenarios that it might be in. So when I drag out a resource and put it into Office, if I tell this office that it's in layout 1 versus layout 2, when I switch to layout 2, that office and that resource will not be there. They'll only be in layout 1. So if you were looking at different you know, floor plan scenarios for a building, for a test fit possibly, or different, you know, if you were test fitting totally different buildings, you can do that, and the resources will be attached to the specific layout or the scenario that you've assigned them to.
Okay. I have a question about the limitations in terms of resources. So are there any limits in the number of resources that you can track? And then also relating to restacking of spaces, can you do that for large numbers of floors, like 20 floors, and restacking resources and floors?
Okay, so as far as I know, there would not be a limitation to the number of resources that you need to track. If you had a large number of resources that you needed to bring in and manage, I would definitely recommend that Excel import that was mentioned earlier. And as far as the stacking goes, let me flip to a building floor plan. Sorry, this is okay. Hold on here, let me pause my GoToWebinar for a second. No, well, okay. Having difficulty showing that we actually have a stacking diagram inside of the software. And what this does is it allows you to look at the building and all the departments that are assigned at each floor. So, you know, the stacking diagram would be just as many stories that you actually had in the building. And you can rearrange those in the stacking diagram however you want. So there's not a limitation to, you know, how many floors or anything like that. And stacking, the stacking diagram is part of the design scenarios as well.
Okay, and someone else is asking, can you show resource assignments and reports?
Yes. Yeah, it's easy to, you know, because ideally if you were going to be dragging out the named resources or the role-specific resources into a design, you would probably want to run a report to then see who was assigned where. And yes, that is reportable. Any data that you put into Affinity, because our template is it sort of acts like a database, if you will. Any of that information is reportable, and not only is it reportable, you can actually use it in calculations if you needed to do that. So yes, it is of course reportable.
All right, and someone's asking, in one option you create a program using the resources. Can you drag the program into the design?
Oh yeah. Let me show you that. Let me get to a floor plan. Actually, let me open up that story 3. Okay. So the way this design was created, so this tab right here is the space program. And this is everything I've got in my space program. It's kind of the abbreviated view. I can actually drag out There we go. Okay, refresh. There we go. So I drug out copy facts. And if you'll also notice that the counter went to 0. So as I drag that out, it is actually drug out from the program. So this copy facts knows that it's associated to the admin services. It's taking on that same blue color that the admin services is assigned. And then the counter to the right is updating because it's letting me know that I am now meeting my quantity requirement as specified in the program. And if I go to, let's see here, let me open up a new tab. So here is my overall space program. Here I was looking at individual departments. But if I'm looking at my overall space program, here's that copy facts. And I can go and look at the corresponding design items. So here I've got 2 requiring 2, and I've got 2 placed. This italicized line below is actually the design, corresponding design space to that program item. So that is how you would create your design if your program comes first. I think I mentioned earlier that we do integrate with SketchUp and Revit. So if you want to bring in a SketchUp model, it'll actually be scanned, and the masses inside of the SketchUp model will generate spaces in Affinity, as well as if you had an existing Revit model that you wanted to bring in and analyze, it'll do the same thing. It'll generate spaces in Affinity. And so in general, people drag out to create the design, but you can do it in those other methods as well.
Okay, great. And one of our final questions here, is it possible to have a standard list of resources to reuse on other projects?
Oh, sure. So, you know, I've talked about this template, which allows you to store your standards. But what we actually recommend our clients do is create a master template. So a master template would house everything that is standard to your firm. So typical reports that you might see, typical space types that get used over and over again from, maybe a hospital versus a office. A corporate office and a hospital are going to have different space types that are standard to them. So we recommend that people create a master template. And then when you go to work on a hospital, you would create a project-specific template copied from that hospital. It'll inherit everything from the master, but it now belongs specifically to that project. So if you need to go and change anything specific for that project, create new space types that don't exist in the master, you can do that.
Okay, and that kind of feeds into the next question of what types of properties can you track, and is it possible to add new properties to resources?
Oh yeah, you can add any number of custom properties to any piece of your template. So anything from a space type, a resource, an object. You can add even project level properties. You can add any number of custom properties inside of the template, and it's fairly easy to do. And those properties can be any type of property either. They could be, show you an example. This particular one is a checkbox. They could be a quantity. They could even, let me find one. They can even have preset choices. So in this particular one, I can type in something, or I can preset what those choices are. You have a lot of flexibility as to how you would like to set those properties up and use them inside of a project file.
Great. That's the final question that I have over here. So I just wanted to thank Holly very much for today's webinar, and this is going to conclude our webinar today. We do appreciate you joining us. If you're not a current customer, please contact us by phone or email at sales@trelligence.com if you'd like to arrange a demo. And we're also happy to help with any other questions that you might have. Otherwise, thank you very much, and have a nice rest of your day.